Interesting. Interesting that Nicodemus appears only in the Gospel of John, and he appears 3 times. The first time he appears is in the scripture we read today. The second time he appears is at Jesus' trial, and the third time is at his burial. The story we heard today needs to be put into some context. It takes place right after Jesus performs the miracle of turning the water into wine at a wedding, and the news spread. It also takes place just before Passover, when the town and the temple are full of people. And Jesus walks into the temple and gets super angry and throws out the merchants and money changers who are selling things inside the temple instead of outside. Jesus is furious that the Pharisees have allowed them to do this. The Pharisees challenge him, asking him on whose authority did he clean out the temple. He speaks back in riddles to them because he knows they do not understand, and they will never, ever believe in him. The miracles in the temple scene take place right before Nicodemus enters our story. So here comes Nicodemus, a Pharisee of high standing. He's a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish legislative and judicial court in Jerusalem. Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night. By night. This, my friends, is very significant. There's been much debate on whether Nicodemus was coming by night as a spy, trying to catch Jesus performing miracles or doing anything else against the Jewish law. But there are a lot of faults to that theory, mainly because Nicodemus appears 2 more times in the Gospel of John, and each time he appears, he supports Jesus. He defends him or supports him in some way. Let's look at a more probable reason to why Nicodemus came by night to see Jesus. It was festival time, the time of Passover. The streets were crowded and the time was busy. Imagine a type of carnival atmosphere. That's why there was so much temple activity and so many sellers in the temple. They had a slew of customers. Listen to what one biblical scholar, Sidney Sandstrom, says about the conditions that Nicodemus faced in trying to find a way to catch Jesus alone. He's quite a story weaver. It might have been difficult to have any kind of meaningful personal or private conversation with Jesus in the crowded streets or in the din of the temple courtyards. If we were able to walk the streets of Jerusalem at Passover in Jesus' day, we would see why it would be difficult for any sincere individual to seek a secluded setting in which to have a private, serious conversation. The streets were blocked by crowds from all parts who had to make their way to the temple. They had to go past flocks of sheep and droves of cattle, pressing on each other in the sunken middle part of the street, reserved for them, to prevent contact and defilement with the people. Sellers of all possible wares beset the pilgrims, for the great feasts were, and has been said, the harvest time of all trades at Jerusalem. Inside the temple space, the noise and pressure were, if possible, worse. Sellers shouted the merits of their beasts. Sheep bleated and oxen lowed. It was, in fact, the great yearly fair of Jerusalem, and the crowds added to the din and tumult till the services, the religious services in the neighboring courts were sadly disturbed. The rents received for the sheep and the cattle pens and the profits on the doves had led the priests to sanction the oddness of it, turning the temple itself into a noisy market. Nor was this all. Potters pressed in on the pilgrims with their clay dishes and ovens for the Passover lamb. Hundreds of traders recommended their wares aloud. Shops for wine, oil, salt, and all else needed for sacrifices invited customers. And in addition, persons going across the city with all kinds of burdens shortened their journey by crossing the temple grounds. The provision for paying the temple tax, levied on all, for the support of the temple, added to that distraction. On both sides of the east temple gate, stalls for generations been permitted. They were there for changing foreign money. In the days of Jesus, the walled portions of the city encompassed some 300 acres of houses and streets and markets and shops. Tacitus speaks of a population of 600,000. 600,000. At the time of Passover, This number rose to between 2 to 3 million. At Passover time, great numbers of Jews camped outside the city proper, but within the limits of a Sabbath day journey. I would say the city was pretty full, wouldn't you? Very full and very busy. So if Nicodemus wanted to have a private conversation with Jesus in the crowded Passover confusion, and don't forget, following a very public demonstration by Jesus against the establishment of the temple, Nicodemus would have to be careful. At night, when the masses of people had settled into wherever they were camping, there might be a little bit of privacy. Nicodemus took a risk in going to see Jesus. He was a favored member of the Jewish elite, a Pharisee, and a Sanhedrin no less. But it looks like he had questions and maybe some statements of his own. Nicodemus was becoming a believer. He was growing his faith. But it was a risk to become a faith-filled believer of Jesus of Nazareth. Friends, how many times in today's world do we here in the U.S. take a risk that could cost us our lives for Jesus? Not very often, right? We don't risk losing our livelihoods, our families, our very lives for worshiping Jesus here in the States. Other places, though, like Pakistan, for example, it's a huge risk. And we aren't able to sneak in anywhere to physically see Jesus and ask about signs like Nicodemus. Rabbi, we know that you've come from God as a teacher, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Nicodemus's colleagues would not be happy if they knew he was supporting a radical, a rebel, a Jewish one no less. But Nicodemus has questions, legitimate ones, and he had the seeds of faith growing in him. What's it look like, taking a risk to get close to Jesus? What would we risk to know Jesus better? And how is that even possible without Jesus right here? Well, if Jesus isn't here, we have to rely on his teachings for us to get close to Jesus. And these teachings, friends, are no less controversial in today's world than back then. What would we risk to be close to Jesus, to his teachings? You know, I think the key to knowing Jesus better is to know ourselves better. To know what we would stand up for and what we wouldn't. To risk discomfort to follow Jesus. Even if it means we have to go against our human inclinations to follow Jesus. But man, can that be hard? Let's together walk through a few risky situations of being a follower of Jesus. Today's world. Scenario 1. You've been hired by a great startup company. They're a Christian-based company and have rave reviews in the financial papers, and you are super excited. On your first day in orientation, you're handed a policy that you're expected to sign. And the policy says, in order to work for this company, you must agree to go to church every Sunday, a church that we approve. Agree to terms as to what marriage is, our terms. Agree to not drink or smoke. Agree to never use a pronoun for God other than he. Agree that women, while they may be a valuable member of the team, are not ordained by God to have leadership positions, period. What do you do? What would signing this policy do to your relationship with Jesus? But you really want this job, you think. This happened to me once in a volunteer position. Scenario 2. There's a man who just started working at your church as an office administrator who wears nail polish, bright red. People are complaining to the pastor. They're making all kinds of comments. As a volunteer, you work with this man. He's a good Christian and a prayer warrior. What are you willing to risk here? What brings you closer to Jesus? How does your faith play a role in this situation? Scenario 3. You're working for an organization where there's a program every year where your department is expected to collaborate with another department. The lead in Team A has sent you, the lead in Team B, a list of all the things your group should do and what they expect your group to do. When you, as lead B, bring up an idea that your team has to collaborate, the team lead A gets very nasty and tells you they have more experience than you and this is the way it's going to be. You still try to promote the ideas of B team onto deaf ears. A month into the frustrating project, you're called into the office by the big boss. I've had a lot of complaints about you and your team from Team A's lead. How come you're not working in the spirit of collaboration? What is it about collaboration you don't understand? You're reeling. Your team's ideas haven't been heard once, not once. This is not collaboration in any way. What do? What kind of risk do you take here? How does your faith play a role in risk-taking in this situation? Scenario 4. You're out at Hardee's on Route 72 having a breakfast biscuit with your buddies. You go every Saturday morning to meet these old friends. You all order sausage biscuits like always, and one of the guys said he heard this really awesome joke and he shares it. And it is super racist. You start to feel uncomfortable. And when another guy says, oh yeah, I heard an even better one, and he starts in, what do? Do you take a risk? You've grown up with these guys. Scenario 5, last one. Some of you regularly get together for lunch once a month. This particular month, Josie can't make it. The rest of the women start talking about Josie. Someone said they saw her coming out of a hotel with another man that was not her husband. All they could talk about was how the husband had no idea that Josie was cheating on him. But no one, of course, had talked with Josie. What a mess. Maybe this isn't the first time they speculate. Maybe she's had a string of men. What are you willing to risk here? What in this situation brings you closer to Jesus? How does your faith play a role? Today in small group and Wednesday in small group, we'll have the opportunity to mull over these scenarios a bit more and discuss what we are willing to risk to get closer to Jesus, to follow him. It isn't easy, friends. It isn't easy. And it wasn't easy for Nicodemus either. He risked an awful lot to just come to Jesus and talk, just to talk, not even to confront or to challenge, just to talk. Yet he did risk, and he did talk. Then later on, he defended Jesus when he built up enough faith to do it. Faith, friends. It all comes down to faith. How much faith do we have in our risen Lord to follow his teachings in the harsh world of today? How much faith do we need to have to take risks for God? Maybe we should ask our brother Nicodemus. Amen.